Hello, I'm Bob Trubshaw. I'd like to talk to you today about Roman roads in Leicestershire, specifically two minor ones which cross the county boundary into Nottinghamshire. Most of the places I'm going to discuss are associated with several Roman small towns in the vicinity of Melton Mowbray. One's at Goby Marwood to the northeast of Melton, another at Thistleton to the east. There's also Vernameatum on the Fossway to the west, and Margidunham some distance along the Fossway adjoining Bingham. All these routes shown in red are probable minor Roman roads. Let's put these places and routes in the local topography. These maps show coloured elevations. The highest ground is white, shading into pink, and the lowest ground in the valleys is blue, shading into green. The county of Leicestershire is bisected by the Foss Way, running from Dorset and Cirencester in the southwest, through Leicester itself, then northwards to Newark, and then Lincoln. The stretch between Leicester and Lincoln is now the A46. The Foss Way to the immediate north of Leicester follows the highest part of a fairly flat ridge, and, provides splendid views of Charnwood Forest on one side and the hills of High East Leicestershire on the other. Now, for about 30 miles between Thurmaston, which is just to the north of Leicester, and Newark, the Foss Way doesn't pass through any settlements, although in Roman times there was a small town called Vernameatum to the east of Willoughby-on-the-Wolds, right on what is now the county boundary between Leicestershire and Nottinghamshire, and Margidunham. In North Leicestershire, the Foss Way is the western boundary of Framland Hundred, now Melton Borough Council. As this map showing Scandinavian place name elements shows, there are more Scandinavian place names in Framland than adjoining administrative units such as Goscott Hundred or Rutland. However, to the south of Leicester, the Foss isn't a hundredal boundary. Indeed, it runs roughly through the middle of a hundred, as the meeting place of Guthlaxton Hundred, named after the Guthlax stone, was at the side of the Foss Way. The southern boundary of Leicestershire follows Watling Street, now the A5. This runs from Dover via London to Wroxeter. In case you're curious, the name Watling derives from Wacklinkers, meaning the people of Wackler, who were an Anglo-Saxon tribe in the St Albans area. In the 9th century, Watling Street became the boundary between Wessex and the Scandinavian settled area known as the Danelaw. Now, as if two major Roman roads wasn't enough, then the eastern boundary of Leicestershire with Lincolnshire is defined by what became known as Sewston Lane, or the Drift, and, since the 1980s, rather spuriously, as the Viking Way. This was one of two routes running roughly north-south. The other route, slightly further east, was once known as Ermine Street, then became the Great North Road, and more recently the A1. The Romans also used a route between Leicester and Cambridge, known to them as the Via Divana, but now referred to as the Gartree Road, as it runs through Gartree Hundred. If you've ever strolled along New Walk in the city centre, then you've walked along part of the course of the Via Divana. The meeting place of the Gartree Hundred was at the side of the Gartree Road, close to where it crossed an ancient north-south route, which I'll discuss further in a few moments. As this map shows, there are several other roads were used by the Romans, including the Ridgetop route from Barrow-on-Soar to Goby Marwood, and this is now part of what's known as the Salters Way. I've discussed the Salters Way in a previous video about Charnwood slates and early 18th century trade routes. Although the evidence is unclear, this route seems to have continued west of Barrow towards yet another Roman small town near Thringston. This is likely to have been a Roman estate associated with what is now Whitwick. The Roman road, now known as the Salters Way, links the Foss Way with the Great North Road, or Ermine Street, and it passes through the Roman small town at Goby Marwood. Another Roman road went from Leicester to Mansetta on Watling Street near Atherstone. A partially known Roman road ran south from Leicester to Tripontium, also on Watling Street, but near Lutterworth. But by calling them Roman roads, are we missing something important? Undoubtedly they were used by the Romans, and the Romans may well have improved the road surface and drainage, but in almost all cases there is evidence that Iron Age people were using the same routes.
For example, the Roman ironworking at Goby Marwood was preceded by Iron Age activities, and several of the routes, especially Watling Street, follow watersheds and ridges, so are consistent with other known prehistoric routeways. And it's one of these presumably prehistoric routes I want to look at in more detail. The modern B6047 runs almost due north-south between Melton Mowbray and Market Harborough. Now, although Market Harborough was only created in the early 13th century, there was an important Anglo-Saxon estate centred at Great Bowden. Let's follow this route northward from Market Harborough. Just north of Harborough it crosses the Gartree Road, very close to the Gartree 100 moot site. A little further north it crosses the modern A47, which has long been a major east-west routeway from Leicester to what was the edge of the Fens at Peterborough. Only in the 17th century did the fen drainage start and the land to the east of Peterborough begin to dry out. But I'm saving the east-west routes for a future video. At Tilton, the highest village in Leicestershire, the B6047 continues to Twyford and Great Dolby. However, there's an earlier route to Somerby, which picks up the straight stretch of road pointing directly at the entrance to the massive Iron Age hill fort at Borough-on-the-Hill. And there's also a shorter route towards Melton, which skirts the hill fort. My suspicion is that the B6047 route was easier for horse-drawn vehicles to negotiate, so the older routes were, shall we say, bypassed. But if we stick with these older routes, we're on a trackway from the north of Borough-on-the-Hill, going due north to Melton Mowbray, passing over the intriguingly named Gartree Hill between Great Dolby and Little Dolby. This route crosses Sawgate Lane, which runs along the south side of the Reek Valley, or the Eye Valley. The river changes its name at Melton, and Sawgate Lane links the Fossway to Thistleton, another Roman small town associated with ironworking. The name Sawgate is a contraction of Saltgate, with gate retaining the Scandinavian sense of road. This Sawgate was likely used by the Romans also, indeed probably long before then, but as I said, I'm saving the east-west routes for a future video. So back on this due north-south track, we're continuing to the north of Melton. It passes through the site of Great Framlin Wood, once the moot site for the Framlin 100, and then continues as a bridle path to Brock Hill, where it crosses the Salters Way. Just in case you're wondering, Brock was the Anglo-Saxon's name for badgers. Immediately north of the Salters Way, the land drops dramatically down a steep escarpment. At the bottom of the slope is the village of Hose, which takes its name from two or more distinctive shaped hills. I've discussed these in some detail in the video about Anglo-Saxon shrines. But there are no such hills in the village itself. But seemingly there were a pair either side of this north-south road, known here as Pasture Lane, just below the escarpment summit. They're difficult to make out now as there's a farm on each one and they're both surrounded by trees, but the contours on older OS maps suggest these small hill features fairly clearly. This is the large farm on the site of what may have been the more westerly Hoe, seen from the south looking up the slope. From Hose, the route crosses the low-lying Vale of Belvoir and terminates at the Roman small town of Margidunham, at the side of the Fossway near Bingham. Now, around 2003-2004, both Professor Roger Wilson and the place name expert Barry Cox independently suggested that there was a previously unknown Roman road linking the Roman ironworking sites at Goby Marwood and Thistleton with Margidunham. Big clue is that part of this route is still known as King Street Lane, suggesting it was in use in the later Anglo-Saxon period. Street was a word the Anglo-Saxons only ever used to refer to former Roman roads. King Street has the sense of King's Highway, routes that everybody had the right to use. This King Street crosses the Salters Way right at the edge of the Roman small town at Goby Marwood, and just a little way to the east along the Salters Way there is a farm still known as White Lodge, as it was once a coaching stop, and white place names are especially common on former saltways. The two towns at Goby Marwood and Thistleton would have been of immense importance in the Roman era. Both would have been generating vast wealth from iron ore extraction, smelting and working. The only downside was that neither were near navigable water, so the resulting pig iron and worked iron would have had to be transported over land, which was expensive. So this Y-shaped configuration of roads provided the shortest routes to connect Thistleton to Goby Marwood, and both with Ermine Street and the Fosse Way. So the small towns at Margie Dunham and Vernameaton could have been trading places for, among other products, the iron. Perhaps even more importantly, there was an overland route from Goby Marwood to the River Soar at what is now Barrow-on-Soar. This route would be later known as the Salters Way. We don't have much evidence of Roman activity at Barrow, but we do have copious amounts of Anglo-Saxon pottery, suggesting it was an important wharf with a pottery production site as well. It's reasonable to assume that in Roman times large quantities of pig iron were loaded onto boats and sent to various places in the British Isles, and quite probably to the continent as well. And I've already mentioned a different road connected Thistleton to the Fosse Way and to Barrow-on-Soar, and this became known as Soargate Lane. As I've already stated, in a future video I will look in more detail at the various east-west saltways in Leicestershire. Suffice now to say they weren't originally just for salt, but at least as important for transporting wool, and as pilgrimage routes, and probably originated as Neolithic transhumance routes for livestock.